This is the Right to Read Initiative, a webcast and podcast dedicated to helping advance our knowledge about how to make sure all of our students in our classrooms are reading. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. Brendan Lee from Australia, and he is behind Learn with Mr. Lee.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about his journey and where he's gone from his pre-service training to where he is now advocating and helping fellow teachers learn best strategies and instructional approaches for students. Hello, can you give viewers a little bit more details about who you are and what you do? Oh no, you're frozen again.
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Brendan Lee. I'm not sure where I got off there, but yeah, so currently I'm an assistant principal at a primary school in New South Wales, but I probably haven't followed the stereotypical path into this position. I was probably always destined to become a teacher. My mother's a teacher, and a lot of the times teachers are part of big families of teachers. My sister's now a teacher, and so I was probably destined for it, but I didn't go straight into teaching. I was a personal trainer for a bit, and actually started off in high school teaching. And I was a high school teacher for almost 10 years, and I guess I rode the roller coaster that a lot of teachers go through, those ups and downs. And I got to a stage in my career where I just wasn't really feeling that same drive and connection to teaching that I once had. And I actually left for a couple of years. I was feeling a bit demoralized and deflated and undervalued with what I was doing. And so I left, and I ran a cafe for a couple of years, and eventually decided to return to teaching. You start those sorts of things for your family, and I just didn't see my family for a couple of years, and so just made that call to return to teaching. But I guess, when I reflected, I felt like a lot of those issues I was having as a teacher stemmed from having students that were coming into high school just disengaged, and that kind of didn't sit right with me. And so I thought, well, rather than being one of those people that kind of sits on the sidelines and just makes comments and whinges and complains about these kids that we're getting, from primary school, I thought that, I would try to figure out what's happening, over at that end of the schooling system, and see if I could, either make a change or work out what the problem was. And so, I made that transition into primary teaching. Definitely suffered from the Dunning-Kruger effect, where I felt like I knew more than I did. And, when you're in high school, you think, how hard can it be, to go back into primary, teach a reading and maths, that can't be that hard. And so, I rock up into this year 4 classroom, and it was a very humbling experience that those first kind of couple of years of just, feeling like a beginning teacher again, where you've got to, what it should feel like, what a successful classroom feels like, because I've taught, year 12 classes, and I know what it feels like, but I just couldn't make it happen because I didn't have, I guess, that the knowledge that I needed in order to teach my students what they needed to know. And, so I kind of went around seeing what other teachers were doing and asking, how do you teach kids to read, or what was questions that I thought were quite simple and ended up being, really, really complicated, where I either wasn't getting an answer or what I was seeing, So the main thing that I was being told to do was like the literacy group stuff. So, as I said, I had a year 4 class, so that's like, 9-10-year-olds over here. And so usually, that we're assuming that they should be able to read by that stage, able to read and write. But, like a lot of teachers, I had students that were having difficulties there. But so I was told to do these literacy groups where I just found them really quite fiddly to manage. To set up, firstly, you've got all of these resources that you've got to put together, and then you've got to have 4, 5, 6 different groups around the classroom. So firstly, you've got that classroom management part of it, where you've got to make sure that they're all on task. You want to try to be having effective things happening at them, which can be very difficult if you haven't explicitly taught any of it. And then it also, you've got to think about the fact that you're only with one group, so like I was with one group, and, maybe I might have been helping that group, but then the rest of the class, I just felt like there wasn't a lot of learning happening, and, teachers talk about, like once you set it up, well, then you know what you're doing for the whole week. And, then you just keep repeating that routine. And again, I was just thinking, but like when is the learning happening? And I'm only with that group, specifically for maybe 10 minutes in a lesson, or it might be a bit longer over the week, but really, it didn't sit well with me. So I've done a bit more probing, and you'll see in the background there, I've got Reading for Life. So I was introduced to that book, Reading for Life, from Lynn Stone. And then, the Writing Revolution from Matt Wexler and Judith Hochman. And those two books, they just really opened my eyes to, I guess, the mistakes that not only I was making, but that I was seeing across the school. And so that's probably what kind of started me on, I guess, the journey of being a more evidence-informed teacher. Like when I returned, I definitely had that drive and that sense of purpose, but I didn't know exactly how I needed to kind of make things happen and make learning happen in the classroom. So I just found, once you start to dig in and you get into that rabbit hole of research, it's really hard to get out of it, because there's just so much to learn. And I've really enjoyed that side of it, because I feel like the more I've learned, the more confident I felt in being an effective teacher, and then also leading others.
Yeah, well, that's awesome that you've done this journey. And again, you have those books that really make the difference for your understanding and your comprehension of the situation. And it's so hard to be sitting there, in the classroom saying, am I really doing enough? And how could I be doing more, but not really knowing the best places to look. So do you want to give us a little bit of information about Learning with Mr. Lee? Or is it Learn with Mr. Lee? Sorry.
Yeah. When I decided to return, I thought like I wanted to extend my influence beyond my classroom, and also just kind of like, for me, it's a process of solidifying what I learned. When you, like they say, when you write things down, it just makes those schemas a lot stronger. And so I found that process really effective for me in making sure, like, when you put things down and it's out to the public, you don't necessarily know how many people are going to read it, but when it's out in the public, it just kind of makes you think a bit deeper about what you're actually saying rather than just saying it. I've always been of that belief of trying to understand the other side, so not just look at things from one perspective, but look at it from both sides. So like if this is one way of doing things, well, then why are people doing it another way? And so just trying to find that out has been quite important. And so that's kind of where my strategic way of thinking has probably come into it. And so when I've been luckily with the internet now, there's just there's so many resources available for teachers and for anyone to, I guess, find the information that they need. But I've also found social media is really effective. Like here in Australia, we've got the Reading Science in Schools Facebook group. I think there's over 20,000 members there, and it's operated by a few teachers, and basically, whether you're started your science of reading journey or you're more experienced and applying it in the classroom, it's just a really good community there. And I know that there's a lot of those sorts of communities online at the moment. I've connected with a lot of people through Twitter, and that sort of thing has, I guess, allowed teachers to find like-minded teachers or educators, because they might not necessarily be at their school. And I know that you've got Dr. Nathaniel Swain coming up for a chat, and he's the founder of this amazing organisation, Think Forward Educators, and I think that's been a bit of a game changer for a lot of people in Australia, especially during the last couple of years with lockdown and everything. I think people have started to realise, I guess, not only the importance of upskilling yourself, but actually the ability to do it anywhere, anytime, with anyone. And I think it's going to be a bit of a, like I said, a game changer for professional development. I think that's kind of the line that we're going to start heading, where we'll have a lot more ability to kind of pick and choose what we need and what will be effective. But Think Forward Educators has basically, if you're not aware of it, it is a platform that allows educators to learn off other educators, whether that's through webinars, or I'm part of a mentoring committee where we kind of pair up, more experienced teachers, or not necessarily experienced, but I guess closer to expert teachers with novices who need a bit of support with implementing that evidence in their classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of thing has been really valuable to not only my learning, but I know a lot of other teachers in Australia here, they're learning. And I think over where you guys are, and with the, and we're kind of seeing it across a number of different countries now, over in the UK as well. I know that they've just released their latest. Did you say? I think it was this morning or yesterday. They've made some changes on their English curriculum as well, and I think what we're starting to see is that the evidence is just so overwhelming that those at the top, whether it's at that government level or whether it is the curriculum or whatever it is, they have to say, like, this is how you have to teach, because we can't afford to be doing the wrong thing anymore. But at our level, at that school level, it doesn't mean that it just, we click our fingers and it just happens. And I think that's the really important stage that a lot of schools are at now, and teachers and leaders, is just managing that change and understanding people and that decision-making process, and kind of what we're up against, because a lot of those school leaders, they were trained in reading recovery, and they were trained in balanced literacy and all that stuff. And so it's got to be hard to kind of break away from that. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. There's that cognitive dissonance where we hear new information that contradicts what we think we know, and so we get on the defensive, and breaking through that can be quite difficult. I know that's probably, like, the more I kind of engage with educators, whether it's on social media or whatever, that's probably the biggest kind of question that I get after, like, what do I have to do? That's the next question is, okay, well, how do I do that when I'm not getting the support from the rest of the school? So I'll kind of forget what the question was originally, but does that kind of help with
That's
I guess.
Great. I mean, what we're having to do is, get out of the mud, right? And, deal with that flat tire of a program or programs that aren't really in line. We're seeing, the recent article in the New York Times about Lucy Cockin's program, and, how some of these bigger programs that have been trusted and around for years aren't doing what they need to do. And they're trying to add it in. But I think we need to be critical of this and take a critical lens and seeing how they're making the changes, and realize that sometimes it's best to go from, a fresh start. And that can be very intimidating and challenging, especially when even, a lot of our pre-service teachers, or the ones that are just coming in, didn't have the, the phonics approach to learning. They were taught in a balanced literacy whole language curriculum, and they learned how to read. And they didn't have the struggles. So they don't realize the other side of the coin for the kids that aren't getting it. And we need to do better. So what I was wondering is, where did you start out from going from those literacy circles in year 4? What was your first step to make that change?
I guess, whether it's a positive or not, like a lot of teachers have a bit of autonomy with what actually happens in their own classroom. And so as I started to learn things, I was able to start, experimenting a bit in my own classroom, and just trying out some more explicit teaching strategies, starting to understand where my students were actually at, like doing some screeners and, and finding out, well, this is what they know is like, they're not where they should be, but this is where they are. And I've got to teach for them as to where they are, meet them where they are. And I guess, like probably the main thing that I just started doing was I just moved to, and I spoke to another teacher, and I just asked her, I said, like, do I have to do the groups? Like, I know that everyone else is doing it, but do I have to do the groups? And she actually said to me, no, you don't have to. That's actually not how I would do it. And she was, at that stage, she was in a non-teaching role. Mm-hmm. And so she started to work with me as to, okay, well, so how
can you just repeat that?
What will it look like if we move? So how can we move away from that and move more towards a kind of gradual release of responsibility? And that sort of model is where I started to move into, where it was that whole class explicit teaching. And then, as students were showing me that they were capable, then I would start to kind of, release them to kind of do some independent work. So rather than starting with the groups, I'd start as a whole group and then drop off into smaller groups, and provide that more structured support for those that needed it, rather than, I think, sometimes we share, like we have kind of mixed ability groups, and so we've got, and then we rely on our students to help each other out. But again, that's a skill in itself, is that cooperative learning. It's a pretty tricky skill for 9-10-year-olds to develop. And if you're not explicitly teaching them how to do that, well, then you can't really expect them to be teachers. Like, it's hard enough for adults to be effective teachers. And sometimes we expect that of our young people, and they're probably not quite ready for it. And so I moved back more into that role of the teacher being the expert in the classroom. And I just found it a lot more effective. In terms of, firstly, I knew that students were learning. I could see the progress, and I was linking up what we're reading in class with our writing. And I think that's another area where teachers who are starting off in that science of reading, that they struggle to understand how to fit it all in, because they're used to having these time slots where they do different things. And so I think getting them to see how, well, if we link it all up, it actually builds up their background knowledge, so that then they can be more effective writers anyway. At that kind of that year 3, year 4 level, a lot of teachers are looking at those reading comprehension strategies. That's what I was seeing a lot of, was scanning and trying to give them those skills when the students actually didn't know what they were reading in the first place. So how can they know what the main idea is if they have no idea what they're reading? And so that was, I found all of that was a big experience for me in terms of seeing progress happen, but also just understanding that just because everyone else is doing one thing, that doesn't mean it's the best way of doing things. I think that that's a trap that we can fall into as well as teachers, is that we're stuck in a little bubble, and so we're just looking around us, seeing what's happening in that room next door or across the school, or you might even be looking at other schools in your area, but that doesn't mean that they are using an evidence-informed way of teaching. And so I think once I started to dig into the research a bit more, and like I said before, looking at those first two books, that was just kind of the start of it. And once I started to discover that there were these different groups online, or different educators who were starting to demonstrate how they were doing things in their own classroom, I found that to be even more effective way of learning. And then as I kind of moved up into like middle leadership roles, it was more about like just supporting, like trying to figure out where teachers were actually at, and trying to support them in making small changes, because it can be quite overwhelming. Like you said before, if you look at everything, there's just there's so much research, so much to understand, and then it's like, well, where do I start? Like, you can't expect teachers to make wholesale changes across every little aspect that they're teaching, but that's kind of the end goal. And so if we're just seeing what we want to have happening at the end of a lesson, it can be quite difficult for teachers to know where do they need to start. And so that's kind of more of my current role, is just helping support teachers in understanding that you don't have to do everything at once. It's just, let's just maybe do a screener at the start, or try to find out what the easiest first step is. I find that helps a lot as well, is if teachers, rather than looking at there's so much to change, if they just look at, well, I'm almost doing this right, or I understand this part of the science of reading, whether it's phonics or phonological awareness, whatever. I find like those sorts of areas that teachers have a bit of knowledge in already is probably a good starting point. And if it's a small change, you're a lot more likely to kind of see success with them as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's also the getting the acceptance of recognizing the position they're in. I mean, there's different people that have posted about the stages of grief that teachers go through when they realize that what they've been taught in their pre-service training and that they've been getting in their professional development doesn't exactly align with best practices. And then they have that guilt for all the students they missed. And that's a process in and of its own. And getting to the point where you can just say, okay, I can't change the past, but I can change the future. And getting that little bit of buy-in. I mean, there are some things that are easy tweaks to alter. One is just working on the vocabulary that you're using in the classroom with your students and how that can help them increase their vocabulary and speaking that to them at that more intellectual level instead of that younger level. And then, getting into screening, learning how to do it, and realize that you're not screening to diagnose, you're screening to identify where your students need the help so that you can then go and give the help. You're not just doing it to tick a box, have it in the spreadsheet and move on. You're using it to actually inform your instruction. And once you start seeing those little successes in your students in your class, things do start to smooth out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like one of the, just reflecting back on a couple of things that you really need to get right before you start doing your PO is just giving teachers time. like it's such a big issue for, I'd say, teachers across the world at the moment, is just having that time to think. And and we're asking them to not just learn, but to change what they're doing. And if they don't have time to think about it properly and to kind of see what the research is actually saying, be open-minded and be in that right frame to learn. Like with our students, if our students come into the classroom and they've had no sleep the night before, or they've got a disrupted home life, they're not going to be able to learn in our classroom. And that's the same thing for our teachers. So, like, one thing I've thought a lot about is, well, how can we give time back to teachers, and whether that's at that whole school level of making systems and processes more effective, or showing that you prioritize like professional learning and actually allocating time slots in the school day for it to happen, rather than a lot of times we see it happening after school, and that's the worst time for teachers to try to be thinking and learning after they've had a big day of teaching. And then the other thing is just getting that culture right, like having a learning culture and a culture of psychological safety is just so important, because if we're going to start to ask teachers to change what they're doing after we've, for a lot of schools, they've committed to all this money has gone into different approaches, which we now know aren't effective. And so we need to create, I guess, the right culture so that teachers are able to, put their hand up and say, yeah, look, I need a bit of help here, or I understand now what we need to be doing differently. But we need to, find out what those reasons are before we start saying this is what you have to do. I think, like, if teachers feel like they're being told what to do, all we're going to end up with is that lethal mutation where, as I guess educators who know what the science of reading or the science of learning or the evidence is saying, they are going to kind of get frustrated with teachers when they're not, I guess, buying into it the way that they'd like, and then teachers are going to feel like they're being spoken to rather than being supported. And what we'll end up with is all these teachers saying, well, the science of reading doesn't work because they have actually tried things, but they haven't implemented it the right way because they didn't actually know why they were doing it. So I guess that's probably like my biggest concern and I guess biggest warning with this next stage that we all go into is, just making sure that you get it right for the sake of, getting it right.
I think it's really important to be understanding and not say that this is how you have to do it. Just saying, you know what, let's take some time to really look at how we learn to read, and having the ability to say, okay, well, looking at how the brain learns to read and the processes involved. I mean, we're not expecting teachers to become cognitive neuroscientists and understand all the imaging and the neuroanatomy around it, but just saying, look, we need to connect the meaning to the pronunciation to the spelling. And that's what we need to do. What are the best ways that we can facilitate that?
And definitely. I think like what we need to, I guess, probably the main thing to start with is finding out like what teachers are actually understanding, what sort of misconceptions are there, and then trying to meet them with where they're at. Mm-hmm. If we know what those sorts of problems are, it'll make it a bit easier to, I guess, target that professional learning. Mm-hmm. And look at what they're doing in the classroom. I think like one of the things with balanced literacy is that because it can feel successful, at the start, like when you've got students who are happy and they feel like they're reading, because they've got those predictable readers that they're going through. Teachers feel like they've got motivated students who are experiencing success, but they don't actually see what the after effects are. So when they get into that year 3, year 4 level, when they're expected to read to learn, not just learn to read, they don't see those effects, and they just kind of push the blame onto those teachers, or they'll say things like, well, they were reading for me, or I had them up to this level, so they show that they're ready for year 3 or year 4, and so I think like that's I guess another area that we need to kind of help teachers understand that when we've got them using those predictable readers, they're not actually developing those decodable skills that they need, and emphasize the fact that it's not just the decodable readers that they're reading. I think that's another kind of misconception of this phonics only train of thought, and that they're only reading decodables for the first kind of 2 or 3 years of their schooling. I think that seems to kind of be an argument that pops up a lot when those, I guess, against the science of reading, and I don't like to put people on sides. I think we're all on the same side, but people tend to align themselves, and when they do that, they can get a bit caught up with being so connected to that one side that they fail to see, I guess, the inadequacies of what is actually happening.
Well, and the other thing that I guess you have one of a unique perspective, at least here, it's not super common to go from high school to primary school. At least, it does in some of the smaller areas based on need, but you have the experience of seeing what using, the balanced literacy approach has, and the multi-cueing system, the meaning, the MSV, seeing what that looks like in students in high school, and understanding that, if we give them a predictable text, that's great, but our high school textbooks aren't there. And I think that's where, the teachers in the primary years, when they're doing their running records and measurements that are designed to support that reading strategy, you get this false sense of hope and belief. And then when you do that authentic text reading, when it's not predictable, where you can't use the pictures, it gets discouraging. And trying to go from something that you think your kids or your students are getting the support that they need, to something that's uncomfortable because it's new to you, can be very intimidating. And it's all about trying to make it so you can see the success early.
I think one of the things we know about motivation is that when you experience success early, it motivates you. And so we do see engaged students using those methods, whereas it can be difficult to learn how to decode, and students can look like they're struggling, but like as adults, we suffer from the curse of knowledge, where we forget what it was actually like to learn to read, and so that's why a lot of those who are for those kind of balanced literacy practices, it's like they forget what it was actually like to learn how to decode properly, and like I know as someone who went through those kind of balanced literacy practices and learning to read, and I went through reading recovery. Like I can still remember, like I found it difficult, and even to this day, like I know I've got gaps in my own knowledge as to how to spell different words, and because I wasn't taught explicitly that way. And again, like you said, in high school, reading and writing was kind of, and like unless you're teaching English, like it's kind of just seen as one of those things that students should already be able to do. And even in English, to an extent, like the students in those lessons, they are not really being taught explicitly how to write a certain way, and they're definitely not being taught how to read at all. That's just all assumed knowledge by the time they get into high school. But almost, when you think about it in high school, almost every subject, I'd say every subject, requires you to read and write at different stages. And so if teachers aren't being given those skills as to, I guess, how to explicitly support students at that level, well then, the students are going to struggle. And like I think here in Australia, there are some teachers who are starting to develop a bit more of an understanding of the science of reading and that structured literacy approach. But that'll probably be, I guess, the next step. Like is once we kind of start to get things right in primary school, there'll be that flow-on effect in high school as well. But like for me, just seeing, like, I would say on average, probably every year, 10-20% of students entering high school just disengaged already, like before they even started, whether that is because they have reading difficulties or they're lacking in confidence because they haven't, they've gone through those year 3 to year 6 in Australia. We have it here in primary school, those primary years, and they have just not been experiencing success. And by the time they get to high school, they're basically clocked out already. And it's quite difficult as a teacher to find those connections again. Like, I think the other thing you need to understand in high school is that they've then got different teachers throughout the day for every subject. And so where in primary school, you might have the classroom teachers developing those relationships. And so maybe those students who aren't achieving as well academically, they're still being supported, with their well-being. But you just lose both of those things in high school, if you don't get them early. So that's why our job in primary is just so important to get it right, because you might not always kind of get the recognition. By the time they finish high school, the students tend to forget about you. But it's really important just to get those fundamentals right in primary. And from what I'm seeing and learning now, we know what to do, but now it's just
you're cutting out again.
I guess implementing it. And
you're back.
We're good.
Yeah.
So I guess like the next step is just getting schools to understand, like, that they need to move past that sunk cost fallacy where they've invested so much money into, like, different programs and stuff, and it's a matter of looking past that and seeing the immediate effects are that we need to just get reading right and get reading and writing right and get those literacy practices right, because the longer we leave it, like the more students, the more young people are getting affected.
Well, and it's more expensive every year that goes by to do the intervention, right?
Yeah.
And you get the learned helplessness and the fixed mindset in students where they're like, I'm done. I'm stupid. I'd rather be bad than stupid in everybody else's eyes, or the class clown, than someone that can't read or can't spell. And the other thing is, the time as students get older, it's so much more difficult to get that intervention time into the day, because what are they going to miss? So if we're able to do the screening early, get the intervention in early while everybody else is still learning how to read, then they're not missing those fun things that they want to learn with their peers.
Yeah, 100%. Like if we get that tier one teaching right, then we don't have to send as many students into the tier two and tier three, um, because yeah, we're able to either catch them earlier, or the tier one is just going to be more effective. So there's less students that need to go into tier two or tier three anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important point to make.
Yeah. So after you started doing the screening in your classroom and more of the explicit teaching, where has it gone to now? Like I know you're in a different role, but at the end of your time as just being a classroom teacher, what was it looking like?
Um, I guess because you have more set routines in place as well, and so you're able to bring the students' attention into the things that matter. So the learning that you want, the new learning that you want the students to be gaining, because of routines that you're setting up. And so that's just things like so. I was using retrieval practice. Basically on a daily basis, whether you call that daily reviews or whatever. Um, and so students knew they'd come in and we'd go through these different routines where we're looking at that retrieval practice, and we go into the explicit teaching part, and students would I'd model to them, this is what a good one looks like, and then we kind of go into what they actually needed to do. What did I see? I just saw students having a better understanding on, firstly, what was expected of them, and how they needed to get there, just through offering, like I said, that the model and supporting them as they needed to move through, the gradual release of responsibility.
And how did that impact, the behavior and the camaraderie in the classroom as a whole
Yeah,
versus doing the literacy circles?
yeah. I think like behaviour is a big one. Um, Firstly, like you as a teacher, you've got eyes on everyone rather than just that small group. Like what you find is if you haven't set up those groups properly, you end up going from you're trying to be with one group, but because there's different issues, or whether it might even just be questions. The
Mhm.
students might just have questions that they don't quite understand what they need to do. So you're with one group, and then you have to get up and you go and help this other group. And then you come back and you where are we up to? And so it just wasn't effective at all. Whereas what I found with that whole class, I was able to get more students thinking for more of the time on the things that mattered, and then I was able to check for understanding a lot more effectively. I just had a better idea as to where they were at and what they were learning, and the students knew what they needed to do to get there. I think like those sorts of conversations and those directions are just really important. Like I mentioned before that curse of knowledge, where as teachers we can kind of just assume things a lot in the classroom, and like without that kind of constant back and forth checking for understanding and the explicit teaching part of it, and offering those models. If you kind of skip those aspects, the students they can nod their head, or that they might not ask a question, but that doesn't actually mean that they understand what they need to do. So I've found that in my teaching to be probably like one of the most important parts of it is just going through teaching those routines early, like the expectations, and how I expect all of my students to be thinking all of the time. Like I'm not going to just accept one or two students to be thinking in my class. I want everyone to be thinking, whether that's doing your turn and talk routines, or no hands up type questioning. I've just found those to be quite effective in getting students to learn and
Mhm.
think.
Now your role has evolved, and let's talk about where you are now and what you're doing. I know tomorrow we're going to be talking about making changes across your school, but let's talk a little bit about how you got to that that position you're in now?
Yeah, so I'm kind of like a middle leader. I know there's different names for this role. Like officially, it's an assistant principal. But yeah, middle leader. How did I get into the role? It was probably just through like hard work and then being in the right place at the right time. So kind of always knowing that my end goal was to move into like a leadership position, and then thinking about what things did I need to do to get there, and then not allowing my title to stop me from doing those things. So when I was a classroom teacher, just trying to, I guess, behave more like a leader rather than just a teacher. So that was just through, I guess, leading different projects or taking initiative over different things, and then once I kind of started to think, well, what do I need to do next to get there? It was just a matter of applying, and then the right leader kind of gave me that opportunity. Like I know that over here, like it can be quite a tricky process in terms of writing your CV and then getting in front of the right people. And so I was fortunate to have a principal who I guess saw how my background would be beneficial to their leadership team. Whereas, like, a lot of other principals would have looked at my background and thought, well, how can we have, a high school teacher who's run a cafe, be an assistant principal at our school. But I found I was, fortunate to be given an opportunity with someone who was quite open-minded and saw what I had to offer in that sort of position. And I guess I've just tried to just be authentic the whole time and just stick to what my purpose was of doing what was best for our students, and our young people. And that has just meant that, sometimes I haven't always just agreed with what everyone else is doing or saying. And, I've tried to just keep, like I said, that open mind and continually ask questions, like, why are we doing this? Or, how can we make things more effective? Because I guess I see like teachers are struggling so much. I don't want to be wasting time or to be doing things that aren't effective. Because, our students deserve better.
Well, and our teachers deserve better too, right? It's not just the students, it's the teachers. Success breeds success. And anything that we can do to help everyone in the situation is definitely an important step for us. And a lot of the research is showing the importance of the administrative roles, having that knowledge, because then you can help lead your school in that change, which is, again, what we're going to be focusing on more tomorrow in our conversation. But you've gone beyond just thinking about your school. You've created Learn with Mr. Lee, and you've got some great resources on there about how it looks like in the classroom. Can you speak a little bit about to why you've created and what you've been able to put into there?
Yeah, I guess that I decided to do that when, like I said before, it's a way of me solidifying my own learning. I just found I had all of these resources and everything and ideas and things in my head or in different places. I use Google Keep a lot to put down my own notes, but I didn't find that it was in a very structured manner. And so I just wanted to put it all in one place. And then I knew that, in the future, I was going to have to kind of lead this sort of change at my school. And I thought, like, I'd rather have one place to point them to, as to, look, this is not what, because a lot of times, like when we hear things being said, we just kind of link it back to that person that's saying it. And so I wanted, my staff to understand, like, this is not my thought. I'm not saying this. This is just what the evidence is. And so to move away from, that halo effect of then linking my words to me, I wanted them to just look at, well, this is the original source of the information, and I've just tried to put it in one place and summarize things that I've learned for teachers. Like, I think like that's kind of what has resonated with a lot of teachers, even outside of my school, is that they appreciated just having one place to go to where they could find that information. And I saw a bit of a gap in having a destination where teachers could actually see what it looked like, because a lot of that theory is still quite abstract for teachers at the start. So they're hearing about things, and yeah, it makes sense. It links in with cognitive load theory and how the brain works and our memory system and everything. But what does it look like? What do I have to do? Because teachers just want to know, well, how do I do this in the classroom? So I've tried to provide as many, I guess, practical examples on there, whether that's videos or another thing is like the timetables, like how do they fit it in, and scope and sequences. And so I put those things on there to support teachers in seeing what it looks like in the classroom. There's a whole bunch of videos, so it's on all sorts of things, from reading and writing. You got your phonological awareness and fluency and comprehension. So there's things from books that I've read, and then just links, and look, a lot of, like I said before, that Reading Science in Schools Facebook group has been a really good place to go to. And I've spoken to a few of the girls on there about using their resources, and had different people look at it. Professor Pamela Snow, she endorsed it, and same with Jennifer Buckingham, and they kind of had a quick look over it as well, because sometimes it can be hard to know, wait, is this evidence-based or is it not? And so it was, even now, I think I put it up there at the start of the year, and I was looking at it again the other day when we organised to speak, and I was like, oh, there's a lot that I could add to this now. Just in 6 months, so much comes out, whether that is it's practical stuff or new research that comes out. So I'll try to keep it up to date as much as possible. But hopefully it's just another resource for teachers and educators to use it as a way of making those links as to what the research is saying, and then how do they actually implement it in the classroom? What does that look like? Because as I said, I think that's probably the most important part now is just getting it right when you do it, and understanding why you're doing things. Because I think a lot of teachers they're looking for programs to tell them what to do, and the danger with those programs is that they can be misinterpreted, or they can be seen as black and white. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that background knowledge to understand how to use it in your setting, and what different things mean, and why you're doing certain things, that's where we've got to kind of run into trouble. Like I said before, that lethal mutation is a thing that I'm looking out for, and I think we've got to be careful with if we are promoting programs. Because I think, like in one sense, it's a really good way to go for teachers, because then it takes their cognitive load away from putting the resource together. Mm-hmm. And so having like a good solid program there that they can follow can be good, because then they they're basically being led through what they need to do. And there are good programs out there that do that, but without the professional learning behind it, it just won't be effective. So I think, like, for any, I guess, leaders or teachers who are looking for programs, just keep that in mind, that if you do implement some sort of program at your school, that you do that combined with the professional learning.
Can we have these? Sorry. No. Yeah, well, and I think it highlights the importance of lifelong learning and realizing that teaching is definitely a profession where that's needed. And going forward, being comfortable with always looking for new things and building that foundation. I mean, ideally, our curriculums are going to get to the point where everything, they shouldn't have to look for a program to do that. And they shouldn't have to look to teachers pay teachers or, websites. They should be able to trust their curriculum and their district to have the resources there for them to implement, the professional development available for them to provide it, and having that resource team or the point staff that they can have to support them. One thing that we haven't really spoken about is, using that knowledge within the school and accessing teachers. I guess you spoke about the non-enrolling teacher that helped supported you on your beginning journey, where she's saying, oh, well, no, you don't actually have to do all these literacy circles. Let's try and move forward, and just not being afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, definitely. I think while, some teachers, they might not be using the science of reading, that doesn't mean that they're not effective teachers, or, they're not experienced, and they've all got a lot to offer. And I think it's important that we're not trying to play the blame game here, and we're not trying to say that you're a bad teacher. But yeah, I think all of us had room for improvement, and like you said before, that lifelong learning is just so important. But that comes back to the culture, and allowing the time for teachers to feel like they can learn, and change, because it does take time, all of that stuff. But yeah, if we can kind of get it right, and support them in doing it, and appreciate what they do have to offer, because like I said, a lot of times it's not actually that hard for them to make the change, because they have the knowledge that they need. It's in there, but they've just been structuring their lessons differently, or I guess unstructured, in a way. And that approach means that not all the students in their class are necessarily getting the instructions that they need, in that manner that will support them best.
Mm-hmm. And there are elements that they've already been using that probably do fit into the science of reading, that they can just tweak a little bit. And it's understanding those, oh, okay, well, so you've been working with Alconin boxes. Well, we can take that one step further by doing this. Talking about, like, I know schools here, there are a lot of them that have great spelling programs that are really good about, explicitly teaching the vowel phonemes and grapheme phoneme correspondences, but currently they're separate from the reading instruction program.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just making those little tweaks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to our conversation tomorrow. And if you are looking for the resources Brendan Lee mentioned during our conversation, they will be available on the replay links, because you mentioned a couple books and the Thinking Forward Educators, and I will include a link to your website where people can get access to some of this great information you've put together. Thank you.
No worries.